Okay, so this is the MA6, and the 6 actually means that we can do exposures for very, very small size up to 6-inch wafer sizes. So the first thing to do when you come to the machine is set up the chuck and the mask holder for the job. So to remove the chuck, just lifts out. Now these are very delicate and they might have, if they're not treated properly, they get chipped very easily. So it's very important that we keep all the chucks and the holders in bubble wrap. So all the chucks and holders are kept here. So today what we're going to do is a 4-inch wafer. So this would be for small inch samples maximum. I'm just going to change the holder to the suitable size. Okay, so this would be the holder for 4-inch. Okay, so again, this lifts out from the bottom, and we place the new chuck on the stage with the pin facing forward. Carefully put the chucks back in bubble wrap. So the job is a 4-inch wafer and we have a 5-inch mask plate. So the mask plate holder would be too small. So again, we change the mask holder. To release the vacuum, this is the vacuum line here, and it's push back and pull to release the vacuum. So again, very carefully put the holder onto the table. Place this back into the bubble wrap. Okay, so we're now set up for the job. To place the vacuum on the mask holder, just simply push into the vacuum fitting. Okay, so we're now set up for the job. First thing we want to do is switch on the machine. Okay, so when we switch on, the first command we see is to press the load key. And on the machine itself, a little LED lights up to indicate where the load key is. So we press load. In pressing the load key, the machine puts itself into its default positions. Now, by default, the machine sets itself for backside alignment. The MA6 can do top side alignment and backside alignment, which means that the wafer is lined from the back side of the wafer, not the top side. So most people tend to do top side alignment. Now all the keys for backside alignment are in this little box here. To deactivate the backside alignment, we press the backside alignment microscope key, and the instruction now changes to top side alignment. So the first thing we want to do is load the wafer and the mask plate. To do this, we place the mask plate on the holder, making sure that it fits on the pins. We then tell the machine that we want to change mask, and it tells us that the vacuum is off here. To switch the vacuum on, so turn the pump on at the wall. So to switch it on, we're told to press the enter key, which is highlighted. Just make sure that the mask is sitting firmly on the holder. We then slide the mask holder onto the stage. Depress, change mask. This locks the holder onto the stage. We're then asked to press the load key. And then the command is to pull the slide and load the substrate onto the chuck. Again, the wafer should sit on the pins. We then slide the wafer into the machine and press enter. When we press enter, the machine performs wedge error compensation. The mask and the substrate come into contact and the aligner moves down. The instruction is then to align the mask to the substrate. We do that by using the micrometers and the microscope. To move the microscope around the wafer, we use the cursor key, which moves the microscope to the left, to the right, up and downward. Now this is actually very slow, so to speed this up, we can press the fast key. So to align the wafer, we have to look down the microscope and use the micrometers to move the wafer. The focus for the microscope is here. And the illumination for the optics here. Make sure that the illumination is for top side alignment, not back side alignment. And this key alters the intensity. Depending on what size of sample we have, we can change the fields on the microscope. For small sizes, we might want to alternate between right field and left field for very, very small size. If we wish to do this, then if we're set for a particular field on the microscope, we have to be set up for the same field on the machine. So in this case, we're set for right field, and on the microscope we're also on right field. If we have large wafer sizes, then very often we switch to split field and also change the machine. To move the optics on the microscope, then use the controls on the dovetail. Down the microscope we can now see the pattern on the wafer, and we can now see the wafer itself. So by moving the micrometers we move the wafer, and by using the microscope we can move to different sections on the wafer to align the jaw. Once we're happy that we're lined up, then we simply just press the exposure key. But we now must also consider what type of contact is required and the exposure time depending on which photoresist we have used. To do this, we press select program, and we are now asked to use the arrow keys to scroll through our options: hard contact, low vacuum, vacuum, proximity and flood exposure. Also soft contact. For this job we'll choose hard contact. Once we've selected it using the arrows, we depress select program, and that stores the command. To set the exposure, we press edit parameter, and again using the arrow keys we scroll through our options. We're set up for a lithography process, so we move along. We're asked to set the exposure time. For this particular resist, which is 1818, we will set an exposure time of 4 seconds. So we're set at 2 seconds and we want to move up. We use the up arrow. Again, to confirm the exposure, we depress the edit parameter to store the information. The other option that you might want to consider is the alignment gap, the space which we can set in order to align the mask to the substrate. So if we go into edit parameter again and scroll through our options, we'll see we can now set the alignment gap. If we have very thick resist, then the alignment gap would be greater than very thin resist. Once we think we have set up the alignment perfectly, then a nice key to remember is the alignment check key. What happens when we press alignment check is that the wafer is lifted onto the mask and it will come into contact. This means that we can no longer move the micrometers, otherwise the resist would scratch. So the user would check that their alignment is perfect. If it wasn't, then we can depress alignment check and the contact is then lowered to the alignment gap distance, and we can move the micrometers until we are perfectly aligned. If the alignment is perfect, then we can now go ahead and press the exposure button. The wafer is loaded automatically and the instruction is to pull the slide and unload the exposed substrate. As the microscope comes down again, the machine automatically thinks that we will go ahead and expose many substrate materials, but generally speaking we do one exposure in order for us to change and clean the mask in between exposures. So to change the mask, we depress the change mask key and the microscope moves up. Can then slide and hold it off the stage and release the vacuum on by pressing the enter command. The optics should also be raised. This is because when the next person comes to use the machine, once they have loaded their substrate, this will come very close to the wet head, which could damage the wet head. So make sure that the optics are raised. In this stage we're now ready to switch off. Okay, so just before we begin, I'm going to explain a few do's and don'ts about the MA6. So the first thing we do when we come to the machine is just make sure that the optics are retracted. Okay. The mechanism of the machine means that when we do our first exposure, the optics will automatically come very, very close to the wet head here itself. There is a danger if these are not retracted fully, then the optics may hit the wet head. This is the most expensive part of this machine. So ensure that the optics are raised. The other thing to consider is the mask itself. Ensure that the mask is around, is placed on the machine correctly. If we're unsure, there is a chamfered edge on each one of these mask plates. This indicates that this is the back side of the mask, and the back side is placed onto the vacuum seal with the holder. On the microscope itself, when aligning, we can split between fields. This switch here is extremely delicate, and just a finger pressure is all that's required to switch in between the fields. If this is tight for some reason, then it means that the objectives on the dovetail are very, very close together. When this happens, this then becomes very, very tight and it does not move freely. In order for this to move freely, we have to ensure that the optics are released. If this is not done, then the machine simply breaks off from the socket. The other thing to consider is the vacuum switch on the wall here. This should be on when you use the machine and then switched off again when you leave it. These are all the things that tend to go wrong when using the machine. Now, if for any reason something is not as it should be, then please ask the technical staff. If things go wrong with the MA6, then it means a lot of downtime. Always beside the machine there is a set of instructions. You can refer to these instructions to familiarise yourself when learning the machine. One of the great advantages of using the MA6 is it's very, very automated, and the machine more or less prompts you to your next action. Okay. Does this by highlighting by means of the switch that you should press next in your process. And there's a little green LED that lights up. So a handy thing that we have is also a nitrogen gun at the side of the machine, and should there be any contamination on the job, then we can just blow it away before we begin.